This is Travis Wayne Goodsell, and I'm going to demonstrate how my two theories function. The first theory that I developed had to do with translating Egyptian glyphs. If you're not familiar with Gardner's Egyptian sign list, for example, you'll know that there's a number of pictures that are missing from the sign list. If you are familiar with any of the glyphs, the sign list is only for text hieroglyphs. It does not include glyph hieroglyphs. And so my theory is that the glyph pictures can be translated as well. And then having made that discovery, I then recognized the story matches with the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the stories there with the glyphs. And so that's my second discovery, is that the 5 books of Moses stories are all from Egyptian glyphs and the stories behind the glyphs. And so I've already done a version of this video that's available on my website, and it was about the Egyptian goddess Nut, and I'll be going over her in the creation story. As you are aware, Mormons have a habit of literally accepting the English version that we have. Mormons have several different versions of the creation story, so there is much confusion among members as to which one is a higher priority. Is it Genesis from the Bible? Is it the selections from the Book of Moses, Joseph Smith translation? Is it the Book of Abraham? Is it passages scattered throughout the Book of Mormon? Is it the Temple? And so Mormons get confused and create doctrines as explanations for why this is the case, and not a single Mormon will ever go to the origins to find out what the truth is. They'd rather create an explanation rather than find the truth. And this video will be a perfect illustration of that. As you're aware, President Nelson has revised the temple and made some changes in there, and I already did a video about how he got it wrong still. Since Brigham Young, the temple text has never been accurate with the origin documents from Egyptian. The Mormons know very well that the story as we have it is incorrect, but Mormons don't realize that Joseph Smith actually gave Mormons the correct answer. The Book of Mormon, for example, talks about the brass plates, and the brass plates are Egyptian, and Mormons don't make that connection. that Mormons should be looking to the Egyptian records for the correct version of the Bible stories. And I didn't go into the study assuming the church was right. I went to the Egyptian language and recognized deficiencies. And that's a different method than Mormons are used to doing through apologetics, which is not really a scientific study at all. And so, having been trained as an actual scientist to do research and theory construction, I use that knowledge to discover the truth about Egyptian translation. So the Mormons had it the whole time, and we'll start with the passage from the first day of creation, as it's called in the English translation. And many people get hung up on the specific wording, and that's a big mistake. Don't get hung up on the specific words. In the beginning comes from the Septuagint, the Greek translation. The biblical Hebrew correct translation is when God began to create. That's according to the JPS, which is the authoritative translation in English. And so if you get hung up on a specific wording, you're gonna miss the whole picture of what's going on. And so what you have here is an instance where Bruce R. McConkie thought that this was some, I'd have to go back to his Mormon doctrine to get it correct, but he made up some explanation rather than going to the source of truth in the Egyptian documents, and that's where he messed up, and as a result has messed up lots of Mormons who followed after the manner of Bruce R. McConkie's teachings. And so this next clip I'll show you the Hebrew word for night, and the word for Lilith in Hebrew, and we'll go from there. Remember that Hebrew is read from right to left, so the L's are the little backwards J's, and the upper word here is night from the Hebrew text. Notice that I'm using Paleo-Hebrew script rather than Aramaic script used in the biblical Hebrew text. And the one below it is the female name of Lilith. In the Hebrew Bible, there's typically a female ending of the above letter. If it were a plural female, it would have the lower, the times signal or cross symbol, whichever you want to call it, the tau, depending on which language you use for the phoneme. I've made the discovery of the origins of the alphabet, which is this script right here, and so the proto-Sinaitic theory of being the origins of the alphabet is way off base, and so my new theory fixes or corrects the incorrect theory of the origins of the alphabet. But there's a guy making a lot of money with the sales of his proto-Sinaitic text of the Bible and dictionary and whatever. So more power to him, I guess, but it's not accurate, and lots of people are getting fooled by that. Anyway, in the Egyptian, the feminine singular ending is also the T, just like here in the Hebrew for Lilith, and so yeah, Lila as night is also a correct feminine ending for a single feminine singular ending, but it also could be Lilith with the T as the feminine singular. It depends on which biblical author was writing which passage in the Bible. Lilith is used throughout the Bible as well, and she's given different translations depending on who the translator is and where the word is found in text. So understand that. Having an actual Hebrew text in front of you helps you identify her name, because screeching owl is difficult to identify it with. And so let me begin with the promised aesthetic nudity to tell you the story of Lilith. Alright, the story of Lilith comes from a text from 800 AD called the Alphabet Ben Sira. Lilith had been known from the Talmud a few hundred years earlier, but she is not explained until the Alphabet Ben Sira in 800 AD. 800 AD is when the Masoretic Jews got together in their different groups to make a translation of the Tanakh, and thus the different methods of translation depending on where the text is according to the ones who were translating that. But this does seem to have some influence, and I'll take you to the ancient Egyptian nudity to show you the source origin for the Genesis 1 story, as well as the origin story for Lilith, because you'll see here that there's an Egyptian connection as well. I'll read as follows. After God created Adam, who was alone, he said, "It is not good for man to be alone." He then created a woman for Adam from the earth, as he had created Adam himself, and called her Lilith. Adam and Lilith immediately began to fight. She said, "I will not lie below." And he said, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top." If you're not understanding what is meant by this, you are living in a bubble. They're referring to sex in this passage. And if you've ever heard of the missionary position, that's where the man is on top. That's where this comes from. The author of the Alphabet Ben Sira about Lilith is trying to enforce the missionary position for all Jewish couples. And if you go to section 91, I hope it's 91, hope it's not 92, I'm pretty sure it's 91, of the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about the Apocrypha, so you'll know instantly if I've got the right section. Joseph Smith says that the Apocrypha there are interpolations by the hands of men. And this is an example of an interpolation by the hand of men. It's where a man is trying to assert dominance over women and telling a story, claiming it to be of ancient origin, and trying to prove his point that his will needs to be followed because of this ancient story that he's coming up with. And he does get it from an Egyptian source document, but he clearly alters it from what the original story was. He's interpolating. And so I'll continue reading. "For you are fit only to be in the bottom position, while I am to be the superior one." Lilith responded, "We are equal to each other, inasmuch as we were both created from the earth." And just a little comment there, the New Temple changes now makes this point where women no longer obey their husband. Women now covenant directly to God. So they do not respond to their husbands anymore. There is no presider in the home. So the family proclamation is now null and void, as I was pointing out, because Nelson has made women equal, and therefore there is no leader in the home. So children now have two masters to follow. As parents are supposed to teach their kids to follow God, but kids need to learn how to find the source of God to follow in their lives. So many people don't understand that, and everybody likes to comment on how they think it should be rather than how it is. And anyway, all right, as I continue reading, "But they would not listen to one another." So that's why you can't have equal partnerships in a family marriage situation, because both will say their way is the right way and the other person has to take the highway. So marriage will never work unless one person is a presider. So that's another issue. You know, not only do kids have to have a presider, there has to be a leader who presides. Because if you have two that are equal in presiding, neither one will listen to each other, and you'll have fights and contentions, and nothing will ever get accomplished. And so I'm not talking about suppressing women. You know, when you have an abusive presider, you don't replace the abusive presider with somebody else who's an abusive presider. That doesn't do any good either. And so, yeah, there's my political commentary. I'm not happy with the Republican Party for being corrupt, and I'm not happy with Democrats who want to take over Republican power just so that they can dominate in corruption in their own special way. So there's my beef with politics. Alright, so it continues on. When Lilith saw this, I don't know if she actually saw it, I think she actually heard, when she heard this, she pronounced the ineffable name and flew away into the air. This has to do with the name of God that gives a person power, and this comes from the Egyptian god Amun, that his name was secretive and hidden, and thus his name Amun, hidden one, and so people were able to have powers of God if they knew God's name. And then Adam stood in prayer before his Creator. Sovereign of the universe, he said, the woman you gave me has run away. At once the Holy One, blessed be he. So you can see the author's linguistic pattern there. Sent these 3 angels, and I'm probably going to butcher them, but I'll do my best. Senoi, Sensenoi, and Semangelof, to bring her back. Said the Holy One to Adam, if she agrees to come back, what is made is good. If not, she must permit 100 of her children to die every day. Wow, my goodness. The angels left God and pursued Lilith, whom they overtook in the midst of the sea, in the mighty waters wherein the Egyptians were destined to drown. So there's the Egypt reference. Well, the direct Egypt reference. There was other hints, as I pointed out, to Egypt. They told her God's word, but she did not wish to return. The angels said, we shall drown you in the sea. See, this is a clear interpolation of this author here, who portrays the Creator and the angels of the Creator as real violent people in order to force somebody to do what they want them to do. And she says, leave me, she said. I was created only to cause sickness to infants. So again, an interpolation, but a symbolic interpolation having to do with apocalyptic literature. And that is more prevalent in the Elijah meeting with Lilith, because that is a direct last days reference, symbolism, apocalyptic literature, therefore. If the infant is male, I have dominion over him for 8 days after his birth, and if female, for 20 days. When the angel heard Lilith's words, they insisted she go back, but she swore to them by the name of the living and eternal God, whenever I see you, or your names, or your forms in an amulet, I will have no power over that infant. And that's where the Elijah story comes in. She also agreed to have 100 of her children die every day. Obviously an interpolation by a man, because no woman's going to agree to have her children die every day. 100 children die every day, and so yeah, I mean, it's out of character. She starts off being a rebellious person, not wanting to be dominated by a man, and now she's consenting to be dominated by God and these three angels who are threatening her life. Let's see. Whenever I see your names or your forms in an amulet, I will have no power over the infant. She also agreed to have 100 children die. Accordingly, every day 100 demons perish. And for the same reason, we write the angels' names on the amulets of young children. When Lilith sees their names, she remembers her oath, and the child recovers. So there's the author's note there as to explain the Jewish tradition and why they do that tradition. Alrighty, so that's Lilith, as this author says, was the first wife of Adam, and as I'm going to demonstrate, she was not just the first wife, she was the only wife. Eve was an interpolation by the biblical author. And so we'll go on to the next step here. All right, now the biblical author here made an error, right? Because surely he doesn't mean generations for heaven and earth. Those are inanimate objects. They're just, objects. They have no life. They're not human. Only humans can have generations. Genealogy, genetics, generations. Same root word having to do with sexual union, producing offspring. And, heaven and earth aren't human, aren't they? What's going on here? That's obviously an error. It should be, these are the days of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made heaven and the earth. Wait a minute, wasn't it 7 days? In the day? Major errors in here, isn't it? No. Well, yes, but no. So I'll get to that in just a second here. As a little side note, this is also where a new God appears. It's now Yahweh Elohim, Lord God. And before it was Elohim. And so then the documentary hypothesis was formed, and they said, oh, well, this is a different author. It's the Yahwist source, not the Elohist source, and there's also a priestly source and a Deuteronomist source, and there's a redactor involved, and blah, blah, blah. And that's no longer a theory. It's no longer a hypothesis. It's been proven wrong. So scholars need to stop using it. That's what I was trained as, was the documentary hypothesis. But it's been proven wrong, and I've created a new theory to replace this. So that's one thing people don't get, is that when something is proven wrong, you got to drop it. You got to let it go. You can't keep holding on to it as a theory or a hypothesis. So, yeah, Christians haven't caught on to that with their creationism or divine command theory and the watchmaker theory of the universe and blah blah blah. Those have all been proven wrong, so they need to drop them. They can't keep pushing a dead horse. All right, so yeah, what we have here is a clue of the Egyptian source document from which the Genesis chapter 1 as it has been formulated, because there were no chapters and verses in the original document. That was created later when they did the English translation. I'm not sure if Luther's German translation had chapter and verse. That'd be something worthwhile to study, I guess. Or the Latin Vulgate, or I wonder who the first person was. I guess it's a Google project. Anyway, so yeah, it's referring to heaven and earth, not heavens, because it's not multiple women. It's just one woman, and we already showed you her name. It's Lilith, or Lila, depending on who the Hebrew author is, or if you're using Hebrew versus Egyptian, and blah blah blah. So Lilith, and then Adam. Eretz and Adam are Adama, not the Battlestar Galactica character, Adama, but it means soil in Hebrew, and that's significant with what I'm going to show you. And heavens doesn't mean the place of God where God dwells, as much as it's just the sky. And so people then create new interpretations for firmament, trying to explain what a firmament is. It's just the air, people. And I'll demonstrate who that Egyptian character is who represents air in just a second here. Yep, that's right. They're all human takeaways. And I'll explain to you that Genesis chapter 1 is not about the creation of heaven and earth. That's right. It is not about taking unorganized materials and forming an earth and doing all that stuff to it. Nope, not at all. There are other Egyptian glyphs from which this creation of earth and even creation of space comes from. And I'll give you a hint, Mormons. You've had the document in your possession, in your canon of scripture this whole time. It's called facsimile number 2. So I'll show you facsimile number 2 here. Oops, wait a minute. This isn't facsimile number 2. This is different, isn't it? Isn't that interesting? Okay, here's the original facsimile number 2. Notice that there are spaces missing, and thus what was put into the Book of Abraham were additions, and I can go into that, but I'm not going to for here because we're talking about creation. Yeah, this is how the creation of the universe, and it's the same pattern of the creation of the earth, with the sun in the center, and earth, as Joseph Smith correctly identifies, as the bull with the crown, and the person with the whip behind him. So yeah, this was the Egyptian concept of the creation of the heavens or space, the universe, as well as the earth. So, yeah, you guys have all been misled on that. So then, what then is Genesis chapter 1 talking about? Let's discuss that, shall we? Okay, this Egyptian glyph I pulled out of my brass plates titled file. So yes, I've got a whole file of the biblical stories, and I could easily go through each and every single story, and I did not too long ago, didn't I? Where I went down to Abraham, explaining all of the biblical stories with the pictures from Egyptian source documents. All right, so here you have the Egyptian heavens being separated from earth that has risen up out of the waters. So there's Genesis chapter 1 right here. This is it, people. This is what the biblical author was referring to when he said generations of heaven and earth. And you'll notice they're human. The heaven is a woman, and earth is a man. Notice also that they're naked. Remember that warning I gave you? So there you go. There's your ancient porn, Mormons. Yeah, I could talk all about that too. All right, so there's a reason why the biblical author spoke about the man and the woman being naked and not ashamed. There's a very good reason, and it's because that's another clue that this is the source document that he was referring to. So not only the passage of the separating heaven and earth in Genesis 1, but the reference to man and woman being naked and not ashamed, again referring to this glyph, as well as these two, heaven and earth, having children, generations. And that would be a discussion that I talked about in the other video with Cain and Abel, and being Nut and Geb's children. That's right. Nut is the heaven or sky, and Geb is the earth or soil or the mound, the primordial mound, as it is sometimes referred to by scholars, and from the translations of certain stories, depending on how they want the story to be interpreted in the text. You'll see that the glyph here has the main characters Shu, Geb, and Nut, but it also has text by each of the characters, and the text obviously describes the particular character. And so you don't have the sign of Shu in this position in Egypt or Gardner's Egyptian sign list, and I don't think I can't, because Nut does have this shape, because I have her sign listed, but anyway. But Geb, you don't see him in that position in the sign list either. So yeah, there's Adam and Lilith. And if you knew the Egyptian story, which I'm going to tell you now. In the beginning, there was Adam, who was self-created. And yes, Adam. Is it Adam or Atom? The T and D are phonetically similar. So yeah, it's not a surprise that the Hebrew uses the word Adam for the first man in his biblical story. But in the Egyptian story, there was Atom, and he was self-created, or through Nun and Ka, depending on the source document that you refer to. And he created by himself, and depends on which text you refer to as to how he created them, because sometimes it's tears, sometimes it's something else that leaks out of his body, and I won't get into that graphic detail about it, but there's that's anyway. And he creates Shu and Tefnut, male and female. Shu is the heir, and he is the male, and Tefnut is moisture, and she is female. And so those are the heavenly parents, so to speak. And so Shu and Tefnut have 2 children as well, Nut and Geb, as portrayed here. And as the story goes, Nut and Geb loved each other. And for some reason, Adam didn't like Nut and Geb having sexual relations with each other. And so he ordered Shu, who likewise had sexual relations with his sister, in order to have Nut and Geb. And he wanted them split up, divided. And so thus you see the picture here of Shu, the father, separating his 2 kids from having sex. And notice the woman is on top, just like Lilith wanted to be on top. This is the interpolation that the Jewish author, or the mystic Jewish author of the alphabet Ben Sira, used to not only explain this picture, but to explain Genesis chapter 1 and create a Jewish tradition, which in Judaism, traditions become law, and so all Jewish women were to be forced into the missionary position. And so yeah, that's how this happened. And then the story involves her being pregnant, and so it was too late for Shu, and the daughter already got pregnant, but because he separated the 2, she was unable to give birth, and that's where Thoth comes in, and Thoth creates a extra 5 days in the calendar year, and on those 5 days she was able to have her 5 children, and Cain and Abel were the first 2 sons of Nut. That's right, it's actually Osiris and Seth, or Set. The T and the TH are also phonetically similar. And you'll also notice that in the biblical passage, after Abel dies, Adam and Eve have another child to replace Abel, and they call him Seth. So yeah, that's what the biblical author was doing. He was going to the Egyptian documents, but just tweaking it just a little bit, because he didn't like some of the original storyline. He wanted something different to control the Jewish people with and control people's thoughts as to what they were to believe. That's interpolation. As section 91, maybe I should check that for you real quick here. Okay, Doctrine and Covenants, section 91, yeah, 91, the Apocrypha. Verily, thus saith the Lord unto you concerning the Apocrypha. Verse 2, there are many things contained therein that are not true, which are interpolations by the hands of men. And so Article of Faith number 8, we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it is translated correctly and not put in, not interpolations put in. That's the understood thing if you actually gained a testimony of that article of faith rather than just having a faith, creating doctrines instead, creating traditions or creating interpolations about what interpolations there are in the Bible. All right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? That's the creation story. This is it right here. Oh, yeah, I got to tell you what it means in Egyptian. Like I pointed out, the Egyptians have other glyphs that represent their understanding of how the universe and even this earth was formed and created. This right here is actually not heaven and earth. It's sky and land, and air being in the middle. Now, the Egyptian story of the inundation of the Nile River is this glyph. This is what this is talking about. So if you hear Egyptologists saying, oh yeah, creation, the Heliopolis creation myth, and it's about the creation of heaven and earth and blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. It's the inundation of the Nile. Because on a yearly basis, the Nile floods. The waters from the mountains down south flood the Nile plain, and it's just one vast water. And to stand in the middle of it, which I wouldn't recommend during inundation, it would appear as if there is no land. It appears as if there is just one watery existence. The sky is the same color as the water, and they look as one. It's hard to tell the difference between them. And as the waters recede and go out into the Mediterranean through the delta, slowly land emerges, and the air is seen at the horizon, separating the sky from the emerging land, the shrinking waters, divided waters. And so you have the upper waters, which are the sky, and the lower waters, which is the Nile River. And land begins to appear again, and then the process of seeds getting planted into the soil, producing vegetation. And notice that when the serpent, as you saw in the porn painting of Lilith, she was wrapped around by a serpent. Where do you think the serpent came from but the Egyptians? I don't think it's necessary, because I've had other videos where I show you the thumbnail of instances of that. Oh, sorry, it's 2 in the morning here. I've been up all night. And yeah, the other video I did showing the Bible stories also shows it. That has to do with the fall. Yeah, the serpent is the creature of night, and so Lilith, being called night in Genesis chapter 1, is associated with the Egyptian Apophis, or Apet, depending on which language you're using. And so the serpent is the creature that has to be fought during the nighttime, so that the sun can rise in the morning. And this is a cyclical event that occurs. And so, yeah, Lilith is associated with night, and night is where the snake is, and so it's forth and forever. All right, so yeah, this is the inundation of the Nile. You'll also notice Mormons in Abraham chapter 1 that it talks about a woman named Egyptus, which comes from the Latin. So, in Greek, the us would refer to the masculine singular, like Zeus, who I've made the discovery is Yah, and then used the Paleo-Hebrew script, not the Aramaic script, and you'll see very clearly that they are one and the same. So that's my discovery also. And so, yeah, well, it's from Egyptian also. The Yamose, the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. So it's Yah Moses, is his actual name as we understand it. And man, I get caught on a tangent and forget where I was because I'm just winging this. I'm not reading from a script. Sorry about that. But Nile River is this glyph right here. And oh yeah, that's right. Remember, the serpent points out to Adam and the woman that they're naked, and so they cover themselves with fig leaves. What is a fig leaf? It's vegetation. That's what is being represented by throwing in the part of the man and the woman being naked, as you see here in the picture glyph, and the concept of covering nakedness with vegetation. Fig leaf is also understood in the Genesis chapter 1 of vegetation growing on the soil that emerges from the waters. And then you have the stars and the sun and the moon before the vegetation. Oh yeah, I got to point this out. Go to the temple. I don't think Nelson has changed this. I think he's kept that in there still. The part where it talks about the second, well, let's see, no. It first starts out with organizing unorganized matter, and then it goes to the light, and then the separation of heaven and earth. That's combined together in 1 day period. Notice that in Genesis, that separation of heaven, the waters from the waters, is day 2, rather than rather than being day 3 and being joined with the emergence of land from the lower waters. So notice that they actually got that part right among all the other errors that the Mormon Church has made with their creation interpretation. And so, yeah, and then after the land emerges from the Nile River receding, then you get vegetation, and then that attracts animals. And so you have animals that come to eat the vegetation and other animals. And then you have a perfect condition for humans to then come in and hunt and gather the vegetation, hunt the animals. That's the cycle of life portrayed with the Nile River. Also notice in Abraham chapter 1 that Egyptus, who is the daughter of Ham and Egyptus, because it also says that Egyptus is the wife of Ham, and you have the first Pharaoh, who's the daughter of Egyptus, who's the daughter of Ham and Egyptus, and he is the one who is the first Pharaoh of Egypt. And so Ham would then represent Adam, and then his daughter Egyptus, and it would be Canaan, Ham's son Canaan, who gets busted or punished by Noah when Noah finally is woken out of his drunken stupor, and so yeah, Ham is the one who goes into the tent, sees his father's nakedness, tells his brothers, and they go into the tent backwards with the blanket, cover Noah's nakedness, and then Canaan gets busted for the incident as he's talking to Ham. And it's like, what's going on? Well, that's because of this story here that I just told you about in Egyptian. So you have Noah, who is Adam. You have Ham and Egyptus, who are Shu and Tefnut, Shu and Tefnut. And then you have Canaan and Egyptus, who are Nut and Geb. And I don't think I put that part in my other video, so this is exclusive to this video. There you go. Ba-ba boom, bada boom. So there you go with that. So that explains what happened, and that's why Canaan is cursed, because he had sex with his sister, even though Ham had sex with his sister. Although the biblical author makes it seem like Ham had a wife prior to the flood who we all must assume was not his sister. But since we're understanding that this comes from the Egyptian documents, Ham did have sex with his sister to give birth to Canaan and Egyptus. And because they had sex, they were then cursed. And so the first Pharaoh, therefore, did not have the authority of the priesthood to set the way for Abraham to then obtain the priesthood and rule over Egypt with his family in the 18th dynasty. Whoops, I revealed more secrets of the Torah that I hadn't revealed in the other video yet. Alright, so but yeah, you can see how this one glyph is understood in several different stories. The flood story comes from the Ogdod Egyptian glyph myth, creation myth. Ogdod meaning 8, so that there were 8 people, 4 men and 4 women who were their wives. So you have Noah and his 3 sons, that's 4, and they had wives, that's 8. And so, yeah, I made that discovery way back in the early 2000s. So, yeah. All right. Any more I need to tell about the creation since we're here and doing a video on it? Okay. I think we're good here. So that's my theory, and as you can see, it's an established theory. I'm able to reproduce the biblical account by going to Egyptian glyphs, plugging in the equations, and that's how I'm able to prove that, or confirm that the theory is accurate. And that's how you do scientific research. You don't create a scenario and disregard facts and evidence so that your theory or belief dominates as truth when it is nowhere near truth. All right.